My mother had been dead for 4 days when her estate attorney called me at 7 in the morning and said, "Sarah, do not let your brother sign anything before we meet. Come alone." I stood in my childhood bedroom with my phone pressed against my ear and the smell of old carpet and grief filling every breath I took. 4 days. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a time since the hospital called. My mother was 61, not old, not sick, not the kind of woman who just stops. She ran a half marathon the previous spring. She kept a garden. She called me every Sunday at exactly 11 and talked for 45 minutes about nothing in particular. And I'd started looking forward to those calls in ways I didn't admit to anyone. "What documents?" I asked the attorney. "I'll explain everything when you get here," he said. "But Sarah, I mean it. Come alone." He hung up before I could ask anything else. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall and tried to organize what I already knew. My mother's name was Diane. She died on a Thursday morning of what the hospital initially called cardiac arrhythmia. The attending physician said it was not uncommon in women her age. I was a forensic accountant. I knew what it meant when someone described a cause of death as not uncommon. It meant they hadn't looked hard enough for the uncommon one. My brother had been the one to find her. He called me crying, or performing crying. I wasn't sure which anymore. His wife had been at their house all day, he said. He'd been checking on our mother. He was always checking on our mother lately, which was the detail that hadn't sat right with me since the moment he said it. My brother had not always checked on our mother. For most of his adult life, he'd been more interested in checking sports scores and convincing people to lend him money he never returned. I knew about the gambling. My mother had told me over one of those Sunday calls, her voice quiet and embarrassed, like it was her fault. He owed people, she said. Not casino people, she meant the other kind. She had already given him $20,000 the year before, and he was asking for more. She didn't know what to do. I told her not to give him another dollar. She said she'd think about it. That was 8 months ago. I got dressed without waking my father. He was sleeping in the chair downstairs the way he'd been sleeping since we brought him home from the hospital, upright and brittle and hollowed out. He and my mother had been married 37 years. He wasn't a man who knew how to exist in rooms she used to fill. The attorney's office was downtown, 20 minutes without traffic, 40 with it. I drove with both hands on the wheel and the radio off, turning over everything in my head the way I sorted spreadsheets at work, looking for the number that didn't belong. His name was Gerald Marsh, and he'd handled my mother's affairs for over a decade. He was the kind of attorney who kept his desk perfectly clear and his suits perfectly pressed and said exactly what he meant without decoration. When his assistant showed me into his office, he was already standing, which told me he'd been watching from my car. "Thank you for coming so quickly," he said. "Tell me what's happening." He sat down and opened a folder on his desk. "Your mother came to see me 6 weeks ago. She told me she was making changes to her estate documents, and she specifically requested that no one in the family be informed until after her death. 6 weeks. I kept my face still. What kind of changes? She removed your brother as a co-executor and co-beneficiary of her primary estate account. She transferred authority entirely to you." He slid a document across the desk. "She also asked me to hold this for you personally." It was an envelope. My name on the front in my mother's handwriting. The letters were smaller than usual, like she'd been writing carefully, trying to keep her hand steady. "She said you'd understand when you read it," Gerald said. I didn't open it there. I wasn't ready. "What else?" I asked. He folded his hands. "She told me she was concerned about unauthorized activity on her accounts. Small transfers, a few $100s at a time, over the past several months. She thought someone might have access to her online banking." "Did she say who?" He looked at me steadily. "She said she didn't want to accuse anyone without proof. But she asked me to flag anything irregular and to call you before your brother could initiate any estate actions." He paused. "He called me yesterday. He wanted to know when we'd be reading the will. My mother died on Thursday. He called by Friday." I kept that number in my head and said nothing. Gerald slid a second document across the desk, a printed summary of my mother's accounts. I had my assistant pull a statement. Over the past 7 months, there were 43 transfers from her primary checking account, all between $200 and $600, all routed to a third-party payment platform. Combined total, just under $19,000. I looked at the statement. The transfers were spaced apart, never two in the same week, always varying amounts. It was exactly how someone did it when they understood that banks flagged patterns. My brother was not a sophisticated man, but his wife was. She'd spent 4 years in bookkeeping before they got married, and she stopped working. I'd never understood why she stopped. I drove back to my father's house with the envelope on the passenger seat. I didn't go inside right away. I sat in the driveway and opened it. My mother's handwriting was familiar enough to make my throat close. Sarah, if you're reading this, something happened and I wasn't able to talk to you first. I've been trying to figure out the right time, and there never was one. I found charges on my account I didn't make. I changed my password twice and the charges kept coming. I didn't say anything to your brother, but I watched him on my computer once when he was visiting. He logged into my banking app from my laptop when he thought I was in the other room. I saw him do it in the reflection of the window. I didn't confront him because I was afraid of what he'd say. His wife has been bringing me food and drinks for months, calling it helping. I've been sick more than I've ever been in my life. I don't know if that's connected, but I need someone else to know that it feels connected. You're the only one I trust to do something about it. I'm sorry to hand this to you. I love you. There was no date on the letter. I read it 3 times, and then I sat very still for a long moment and let the information settle into the part of my brain that didn't panic, the part I used at work when numbers told me something a client didn't want to hear. My mother thought my brother was stealing from her. My mother thought his wife's cooking might be making her sick. My mother wrote this letter and then died of cardiac arrhythmia 5 weeks later. I went inside. My father was awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. I kissed the top of his head and asked him if he'd eaten. He said my brother had brought food the night before, soup and bread, and a thermos of something. I asked where the thermos was. He pointed to the counter. I picked it up carefully with a dish towel and set it aside without explanation. My father looked at me. He had the eyes of a man who'd been through enough to recognize when someone else was carrying a secret. What did the attorney want? Just paperwork, I said. Don't worry about it yet. He nodded. He didn't believe me, but he didn't push, and I loved him for that. I spent the rest of the morning in the small office my mother kept off the kitchen. She'd been organized her whole life, folders labeled, receipts saved, passwords written in a notebook she kept in the bottom drawer under a box of old birthday cards. I found the notebook, I found the passwords, and then I found what she'd been building. There was a folder on her desktop labeled Tax Documents 2022. Inside it, nested under a subfolder labeled MISC, was another folder called H. Inside that, nothing but a single spreadsheet. It was meticulous. Every transfer was logged. Date, amount, which account it left from, which platform it went to. She'd been tracking it for 7 months. Beside each entry was a note. R. Brought dinner. Felt sick that night. Stomach. Then 3 entries later. R. Brought coffee and pastries. Nausea for 2 days. Then, skipped dinner with them. Felt better by Sunday. R. Was my sister-in-law. I didn't move from that chair for 40 minutes. My mother was a thorough woman. She documented her garden yields and her grocery spending, and apparently, when she became afraid, she documented that too. My phone buzzed. A text from my brother. Hey! Trying to reach Dad. Is he up? We want to come by with food tonight. I set the phone face down without answering. The forensic part of my brain, the part that had spent 9 years finding money people tried to hide, was already mapping the structure. Small transfers, inconsistent timing, third-party platform. It was a layered approach. Whoever set it up understood the basics of avoiding automated fraud detection, and my sister-in-law had worked in bookkeeping. The geometry was unambiguous. I copied the spreadsheet to a thumb drive. Then I went back through the folder and found something I hadn't expected. A second document, a log of phone calls. My mother had written down dates and durations of calls from my brother, and beside each one, a single word describing his tone. Urgent, asking, pressuring, angry, apologetic, pressuring again. The last entry was dated 11 days before she died. The word beside it was threatening. I plugged in my own laptop and opened a browser. I searched the payment platform from the spreadsheet. It was a peer-to-peer service, the kind used for splitting dinner bills and paying babysitters. It could also be used to drain someone's account $200 at a time for months without triggering a bank alert if you were patient about it. My brother was not patient by nature. His wife was. I called a colleague from work, a woman named Priya who did financial fraud investigation for a federal contractor. We'd worked together twice, and she knew how these transfers could be traced. I described the situation without using names. She listened, and then she said, "That payment platform keeps IP logs for 18 months. If you can get someone with the right standing to request them, you'll see exactly which device initiated each transfer. Who has that standing? Depends on what charge you're building toward," she said. "But if you're talking about elder financial abuse and potential harm to a vulnerable adult, the FBI has a financial crimes unit. So does the state AG's office. Either one could open a subpoena." I thanked her and sat quietly for a moment. Then I picked up my phone and called the FBI field office in Chicago. The agent who answered had a flat, measured voice and the demeanor of someone who had heard everything. I told her I had a deceased parent, documented evidence of financial exploitation, and a letter from the decedent expressing concern about deliberate poisoning by a family member. I used the word poisoning because my mother had used it in spirit, if not in exact phrasing, and I knew what happened when you danced around the serious word. There was a pause. Then she said, "Can you come in today?" Her name was Agent Renata Torres. She was around 40. With close-cropped hair and reading glasses she took off and set on the desk before I'd finished talking. She let me speak for 12 minutes without interrupting. I laid out the spreadsheet, the letter, the phone log, and the timeline of my mother's symptoms alongside the visits from my sister-in-law. When I finished, Torres said, "Your mother's cause of death was cardiac arrhythmia." "That's what they recorded," I said. "She was 61 and ran a half marathon in April. You're suggesting the arrhythmia was induced." "I'm suggesting her letter and her symptom log suggest she was afraid it would be. And then it was." Torres put her glasses back on and looked at the documents again. "Was there a toxicology screening at autopsy?" "Standard autopsy found nothing unusual. But standard panels don't screen for everything." I had looked this up on the drive over. Certain compounds, cardiac glycosides, for example, metabolize quickly. You need to know what you're looking for. Torres looked at me over the glasses. "You've done your homework." "I do financial fraud for a living," I said. The math of this looked wrong to me from the beginning. She asked me to leave the originals with her and said she would return copies. I handed over everything I'd brought, including the thumb drive. She asked for my brother's full name, his wife's name, their address, and their known financial situation. I gave her all of it, including the gambling debt and the $20,000 my mother had already given him. I told her about the phone call from Gerald Marsh, and the 43 transfers, and the thermos on my father's kitchen counter. Torres looked up sharply at the thermos. "Where is it now?" "On the counter where I left it. I didn't want my father drinking from it." She wrote something down. "Don't touch it. Don't let anyone else touch it. I'm going to send someone to collect it today." She paused. "Don't tell your brother or his wife we spoke. Don't give any indication you're concerned about anything except the grief." I thought about my father at the kitchen table with his cold coffee. "I can do that." "One more thing," Torres said, her voice steady. "Is there any chance the IP logs from that payment platform will show your brother's device?" "His wife set it up," I said. "My guess is you'll find hers." She nodded slowly, like someone confirming a number she'd already calculated. "We'll see." I drove back through the city in the gray mid-afternoon light. My brother called twice. I let it ring both times. When I pulled onto my father's street, I saw their car parked in front of the house. Both of them were at the door when I came up the walk, arms full of grocery bags, his wife smiling the particular smile she used when she wanted something to appear casual. "We tried to reach you," my brother said. "I know," I said. "I was running errands." His wife glanced at me. "We brought groceries. Figured your dad could use a real meal." "That's kind," I said. "But the neighbors already brought enough to last a week. You didn't have to." She held the bags a little higher. "It's no trouble. We made that soup your dad likes." "Come in," I said, and I kept my voice exactly as warm as it needed to be. My father was on the couch. He brightened slightly when he saw them. the reflex of someone who'd spent 37 years answering the door to whoever his wife loved. He didn't know yet that the picture had changed. I wasn't going to tell him tonight, not until I had something solid enough that it couldn't be argued away. I watched my brother while his wife went to the kitchen. He sat in the armchair across from my father and talked about the arrangements, what still needed to be done, who had called, what the neighbors had said. He was good at filling a room with words, always had been. It was one of the things that had made him hard to see clearly when we were young. Noise read as presence. His wife came back with soup in 2 bowls. She set one in front of my father and handed me the other with a smile. "I'm not hungry," I said. "I'll eat later." Something moved across her face, too small to be certain. She set the bowl on the coffee table. "It'll keep," she said. My brother started talking about the will. He eased into it the way he eased into all uncomfortable topics, through the side door, framing it as practicality. "We should probably get ahead of the estate stuff soon," he said. "I know it's not great timing, but the longer you leave accounts open, the more complicated it gets." "Gerald Marsh is handling it," I said. "He'll contact us when the time is right." My brother shifted. "I actually spoke to Gerald." "I know," I said. He mentioned. A pause. His eyes moved to me, and then away. "Well, he's a little old school about the process. We might be able to move things along faster if..." "If what?" His wife touched his arm, and he stopped. They had a language between them, the kind couples develop over time, and that touch said not yet. "Never mind," he said. "I just want to make sure Dad is taken care of." "He is," I said. An hour later they left. I walked them to the door and stood on the porch while they went to their car, watching the way they moved. His wife got to the passenger side before he finished unlocking. She was already talking to him before the doors closed. Tense and low. He rubbed his face in the particular way he did when someone was pointing out something he didn't want to hear. I went back inside, rinsed both soup bowls without touching the one meant for me, and set them in the drying rack. 2 mornings later, Torres called. "The IP logs came back," she said. "Every transfer from your mother's account was initiated from the same device. It's registered to your sister-in-law." I sat down. Even when you expect a number, seeing it confirmed was its own kind of impact. "What else?" I asked. "The thermos," Torres said. "Our lab found elevated levels of digoxin. It's a cardiac medication. In therapeutic doses, it's prescribed for certain heart conditions. In concentrated doses over time, it causes arrhythmia." The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. "She wasn't prescribed digoxin," I said. "No," Torres said. "She wasn't. But it metabolizes quickly in the system, which is why it wasn't caught in a standard autopsy panel." A pause. "We're going to request an amended toxicology on the tissue samples that were retained. That's standard procedure with a case like this." A case like this. My mother was now a case. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes and breathed. "What happens now?" I asked. "We move forward," Torres said. "I want you to understand that we have enough to open a full investigation. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, elder abuse, and now potential homicide. But I'd like your cooperation in something before we make an arrest." I lowered my hands. "Tell me." She wanted a recorded interaction. She wanted my brother and his wife to believe they were close to convincing me to drop whatever I'd started. She explained it to me in careful, measured language. "They were already nervous," she said. "Nervous people confirmed things when they thought they were winning." She gave me a device smaller than a thumb drive. She told me where to keep it. She said there would be 2 agents nearby. I called my brother that afternoon. I kept my voice tired, which required no acting. I said I'd been thinking, and maybe he was right that we should talk about the estate sooner rather than later. Maybe we could meet for coffee tomorrow, just the 3 of us. He said yes before I finished the sentence. His wife agreed in the background. We met at a coffee shop 10 minutes from my father's house. Corner table, wide windows, the kind of place where voices carried just far enough to be recorded and just loud enough that no one nearby would think twice about a family discussing logistics. They arrived before me and had already ordered. That was deliberate. It was the same move I'd seen my brother make in negotiations before, establishing territory. I ordered water and sat down. His wife smiled. "We're glad you reached out," We didn't want any tension. Neither did I said. My brother leaned forward, hands around his mug. Look, we know this has been hard. It's been hard for all of us. But the estate needs to be handled and Gerald is dragging his feet, and honestly, there's no reason this has to be complicated. What do you need from me? I asked. He glanced at his wife. She took over, which was their pattern. There are some accounts that are jointly titled with her name. If we move quickly to transfer them before probate gets involved, it's simpler for everyone. Less tax exposure, less waiting. What accounts? I asked. She listed 2. Both were accounts my mother had recently removed my brother's name from, according to Gerald. She didn't know that. She thought she was describing accessible money. Those accounts are part of the estate, I said. I'm not sure we can move them outside of probate. Her smile stayed fixed. We've looked into it. There's a way to do it if the right family member initiates the transfer. The right family member, I repeated. As primary next of kin, she said. I looked at her. You want me to transfer estate accounts before probate? To avoid tax exposure. To simplify, she said. My brother put his hand on the table, palm down, a gesture of patience. Sarah, we're not trying to cheat anyone. We just want this to be clean and fast. There's no reason to drag it out. How much do you owe? I asked. The question landed differently than I intended. His face changed. His wife's hand moved under the table. What? Your debt, I said. How much is it now? Mom told me about the 20,000. She told me about the people you owe. He sat back. That has nothing to do with this. It has everything to do with this, I said calmly. She was cutting you out of the estate. She was watching her accounts go empty. And she was getting sick every time your wife brought food over. Those 3 things together are not a coincidence. His wife's composure cracked first. That is a vicious thing to say. The digoxin in the thermos you left at my father's house was also a vicious thing, I said. But here we are. The silence that followed was different from any silence I'd sat in before. It had texture to it. My brother's mouth opened and then closed. His wife's face went from red to pale in under 5 seconds. She reached for her bag. We're leaving. You can, I said. But I want you to know that this conversation has been recorded, and the agents outside have been listening to all of it. She stopped moving. My brother looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face before. Not anger, not grief, not the practice performance he wore at the funeral, just naked, uncovered fear. The expression of someone who'd built a version of reality on the assumption that a certain person would never look too closely, and had just discovered they were wrong. This is a mistake, he said quietly. You're making a mistake. Mom didn't make one, I said. She documented everything and left it with someone she trusted. You assumed that person was grieving too hard to pay attention. His wife stood up, and the moment she did, the door at the front of the coffee shop opened. 2 agents walked in, unhurried, exactly as Torres had described. They crossed the room without drama, and they were very clear about who they were and what was happening. My brother didn't fight. He sat very still for a long moment, and then he stood when they asked him to stand. And I watched his wife's face while it happened, and it was like watching someone calculate, even then, whether there was a version of this they could still control. There wasn't. I drove to my father's house afterward, and I sat with him at the kitchen table, and I told him most of it. Not everything at once. Enough for him to understand what his son had done, and enough to explain why his wife's attorney was going to be calling soon. He listened without speaking. At the end he was quiet for a long time, and then he said, Your mother knew. Yes, I said. She always knew things she didn't say out loud, he said. He looked at the table. She didn't want to be the one to break this family apart. She tried to give him every chance to stop, I said. He nodded. He was still nodding slowly when I got up to make him dinner. The investigation took 4 months. The amended toxicology confirmed digoxin in my mother's tissue samples. Consistent with repeated low-dose administration over an extended period, the IP logs matched my sister-in-law's device to all 43 transfers. A forensic accountant, not me, a different one brought in by the prosecution, reconstructed the full financial picture. Over 14 months, they had taken $26,000 from my mother's accounts. Combined with the $20,000 she had given voluntarily under pressure, They had taken nearly $50,000 from a woman who had spent her entire life being careful with money, so she had something to leave behind. My brother's gambling debt at the time of her death was $38,000. I testified at trial. I described my mother's spreadsheet. I described her letter. I described the symptoms she had logged and the timeline that matched the visits from my sister-in-law. The prosecutor played the audio from the coffee shop. When my sister-in-law's voice filled the courtroom explaining how to transfer estate accounts to avoid probate, the jury shifted in their seats. The defense argued stress, grief, misinterpretation. They said the digoxin in the thermos could have been a mistake, a contamination, a misread. The toxicologist explained in very plain terms why none of that was scientifically possible. My brother was convicted of first-degree murder, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and elder abuse. He was sentenced to life without parole. My sister-in-law was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, financial fraud, and elder abuse. She received 35 years. The judge read the verdicts in a voice that did not waver. My father was in the courtroom. He had insisted on coming, and I had not argued. He sat beside me with his hands folded in his lap, and when the last verdict was read, he let out one long, slow breath. Not relief exactly. The sound a person makes when something heavy is finally set down. Outside on the courthouse steps, the afternoon was overcast and cold. My father took my arm without saying anything. We stood there for a moment in the gray air. Your mother would have hated all of this, he said. I know. She also would have told you that you did exactly right. Agent Torres walked past on her way out and gave me a brief nod, the kind that meant everything it needed to and nothing more. I returned it. My father and I walked to the car together. He moved slowly, but he moved steadily, and I matched his pace. I thought about the Sunday phone calls and the 45 minutes about nothing, and the letter in her careful handwriting asking me to finish something she'd been too afraid to start. She had documented everything she could from the inside of a situation where every exit felt dangerous. She tracked the money and the meals and the timing of her own illness because she trusted that if something happened, someone would find it and know what it meant. She trusted me to be that person. The case was closed. The accounts were frozen and the estate was settled, and my father had enough to live comfortably in the house he and my mother had shared for 37 years. Justice didn't give any of it back. It never does. But it acknowledged that she was right, and that she had mattered, and that the people who counted on her silence to protect them had miscalculated badly. She always knew things she didn't say out loud. She found a way to say this one.